Now, delighted to say we are joined not only by a four-time Olympic champion, but also the man being heralded as the mastermind behind one of the greatest comebacks in sporting history. It is Sir Ben Ainslie. Sir Ben, welcome along. Right, let's start with this America's Cup. Well, where do you start with this America's Cup? Absolutely phenomenal. Have you got your head around being described as the mastermind behind one of the greatest comebacks in sporting history?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I have to say I'm being slightly embarrassed by some of the headlines. That if you didn't know any better, you'd think I was sailing on my own again. But this was absolutely a team achievement. There are 130 people in the Oracle setup, and there were 11 of us on the boat out there racing. And yeah, I came in sort of halfway through the event when things weren't looking too good. But there are a number of other factors that sort of were involved with our comeback, and for me personally, it was really an honour to race with those guys and to be part of such an amazing team and such an amazing comeback.
There was a whole load of typical understatements there. You said things weren't looking very good. I've heard you described, if the America's Cup is like a game of chess, they described you as the Garry Kasparov of the Oracle team, the grandmaster charged with planning the crowning moves. Yeah. Just tell us what you had to do and what was involved here.
Well, these new boats that you're seeing there, we're racing the America's Cup, are incredibly physical. So gone are the days of you used to have a tactician, a strategist, a navigator, and then the helmsman or the skipper, and it'd almost be a little tea party at the back of the boat there trying to plan the next move over a race that would typically take 2.5 hours. Now these races take 25 minutes. The boats are screaming around at 50, 60 miles an hour. And everybody on the boat, including the tactician, which was my job, is working really physically at the same time to help power the boat. And so it's a totally different game out there for us, and I think that's why people took to this style of racing. People that were watching it, okay, it was a great comeback, but also just those scenes of watching those boats and how fast and physical they are. I think that's what it's really been inspiring for all of us in the sport.
Team New Zealand teetered on match point for so long. 8-1 up they were, for you to then come back to win 9-8. Of course, it is the first to 9. Did you really feel every time you went into another race that you're going to get closer and closer?
I have to be honest. When we were 8-1 down, that when they got to match point, a lot of us were scratching our heads, and it was going to take a huge comeback, obviously. And we never gave up, you know, and every day we'd go back, we'd work with the technicians, the designers, look at ways we could improve the performance of the boat. And this America's Cup was always going to be a development race. And I think that was the secret for us, whereas the Kiwis maybe stood still. We kept developing our boat, and we got faster and faster, we got more confident in how to sail the boat. And in the end, you know, we were, for those last two races, we were completely unstoppable. So it was amazing to be a part of, an amazing learning opportunity as well.
Got to spare a thought for John Kostecki, the man you were brought in to replace. When were you asked, and what was the procedure for bringing you in?
Well, you know, it's like any other sporting team. It's like a football team. We had a big squad. We had 21 sailors. Obviously, only 11 would ever race at one time. So we had strength in numbers, and this was something which the management decided, Jimmy Spithill, the skipper, decided that we needed to make a change. And I don't think it was necessarily that John Kostecki had done anything wrong. At that point, we were in pretty dire straits, and we were looking for something. And I guess for someone like myself to come in with a different perspective, slight breath of fresh air, and try and lift the mood on the boat and really get people believing that we could still win races and we still had a chance. So I really came in and tried to be Mr. Super Positive, really, and get everyone G'd up, and that seemed to work.
It, of course, is the world's oldest international sporting trophy. And it really did catch the public's imagination in America and New Zealand and over here as well. We were all fascinated by it. Not only was it a fantastic comeback, the setting in San Francisco Bay was amazing. You had those wonderful onboard camera images that we've been able to see. Do you think this sport now can really capitalise on what's been achieved?
Well, that's the biggest positive out of this whole event for us as a sport in sailing. I think it's really transformed people's ideas of sailing, and to, like I said, to see how fast these boats go, how physical they are. Oh. One of Joey Newton, our trimmer, falling off the side of the boat. I think, you know, people's perceptions of the sport have changed dramatically, and that's great, especially for younger kids out there watching that. You know, I think that's now something which they would say, okay, I'd like to have a crack at that. That looks pretty cool. And for the America's Cup and for the sport of sailing, it's a huge moment.
Absolutely incredible shot. Says not been a British victory 162 years of the America's Cup. Right. let's get down to the possibility of a British team then. I'm looking at some of the figures. The America's Cup team quoted around about 62.5 million to get that going. Is it a possibility though that we could have a British team with you spearheading this?
Well, we clearly have the talent in the UK with sailors, designers. You know, there are a lot of sailors out there across the different teams that are competing, and designers. But you're right, in past years, past America's Cups, the funding has been a critical issue. This time round, you know, it's no secret that this type of boat got out of control, and you know, we only had 4 teams. We had Larry Ellison, Team New Zealand, which were heavily backed by the government, Prada, Luna Rossa or Prada, and the Swedish team Artemis. And so I think the future now, which again is under Larry Ellison's control, but I know very much spending time with him that they see the need to reduce the cost, to bring more teams in, to make it much more commercially viable. We won't know for a couple of months the real details of the next America's Cup, you know, where it is, when it is, the type of boat, and that's when you realistically can come down to the cost, what it's going to cost you to have a viable team to win it. And I don't think we want to have a team in the UK unless we know we've got a real good shot at winning it, because we've been there in the past where perhaps we didn't have the resources, and it just takes the British perception of the America's Cup back a step. So now we're in a great position, but we need to find out more about the future, and you know, if it's possible to build a viable team to win it.
You've spoken about Larry Ellison. Reports suggest that he's invested, what, around $500 million in 11 years. It's quite staggering.
Pocket change for him.
But how can you compete with that sort of funding?
Well, like I said, it depends, you know, on the rules moving forwards, the venue, the class of boat. And I know, you know, I've spoken to Larry personally about this. I know that he really wants to reduce the costs. He would love to see the America's Cup more like a sporting franchise, perhaps like baseball and football in the US. That's really how he would like to mould the future of the America's Cup, so the teams can be much more commercial, perhaps even have an ownership in the circuit. And I think we'll see some quite dramatic changes this time around. I certainly hope so.
From building a team from scratch, there is a template, isn't there? And Team Sky, what they've done in cycling within 5 years, 2 British winners of the Tour de France. Will you be trying to draw inspiration from other people who've been through this process, albeit in other sports?
Well, it's fantastic that Sky are offering to support the team. That's great.
Oh, my goodness, you've just got me sacked.
No, I think we're all, you know, all in awe of what Team Sky have done in the cycling world in the past few years. Certainly with Bradley Wiggins and Chris Froome spearheading those challenges, and obviously Chris Hoy and many others in the Olympic cycling. So yeah, I think that is a really good role, really good model of what you can do. And like I said, we have the talent across the board in terms of sailors, designers. We need to sort of get, you know, the British sporting establishment behind this team if we move forwards, and certainly the response that I've had since the America's Cup has been fantastic from many, you know, heavy hitters in the world of sport. So there's definitely a lot of support out there.
And we have to ask you that, of course, the America's Cup was slightly overshadowed somewhat by the sad death of the British sailor Andrew Bart Simpson. It goes to show how dangerous a sport it really is. How has the sailing community dealt with that tragedy?
Well, the sailing community is very close. It's actually a pretty small world in the America's Cup, and so all of us were devastated. I mean, Andrew was one of my very best friends, and you know, to see the effect that had on everyone, the way people stopped, did whatever they could to try and help the Artemis team, which Andrew was sailing with, and with Ian Percy. I mean, those guys were really brothers, and it was very, very difficult for all of us. And certainly, as far as the sport was concerned, we stopped. We took a very good look at the safety of the boats, the equipment that the sailors were wearing, the conditions that we're sailing these boats in, and I think most of us are pretty confident. Yes, there will always be a danger sailing these types of boats, but with the changes that we made, it was much, much safer than before. And it will be a consideration going forwards, of course it will. I mean, these boats, actually, without being too technical, they weren't actually designed to, the rule wasn't written for them to fly around like they were. So if you design a new rule, or put together a new design rule, it could be much safer for these types of boats that are flying around on the foils. So yeah, it's something it was devastating. It was a tragedy for all of us, and we'll never forget Andrew. He's always very close to us.
And I understand there's been one suggestion to any prospective British boat calling it Bart. Would that be something, a fitting tribute?
Well, I think whether you talk about Olympic sailing or America's Cup sailing, you know, Andrew Simpson or Bart Simpson is a name which will always be synonymous with that. And yeah, we will, like I said, he'll always be very close to us. Whether or not we can call the team Bart or not, we'll have to wait and see. That would be a nice thing to be able to do.
Yeah, well, we saw the pictures of you there, along with Andrew Simpson as part of Team GB. So, but all of you Olympic sailors. I mean, tell us exactly the difference between the Olympics and the America's Cup for those that wouldn't really know.
Well, the Olympics is, okay, we're a team now, we're part of Team GB, but mostly certainly in sailing and the classes that I've sailed, I've always been on my own. And the America's Cup is much more about a team effort, sailing on the boat with 11 other guys, and we had 120 plus people in the overall team. But I have to say, it was the most rewarding experience, actually being successful in something like that, a comeback like that, doing that with a team. It was incredibly rewarding, much more so than being on your own and maybe giving yourself a pat on the back, to share that with those guys. And I think we really formed a very strong bond. And you know, you hear it often with rugby teams and alike, that you know, they share something special, and you will always remember that as a group, and you meet the guy walking down the street in years to come, and you'll share that bond that we formed going through that amazing comeback.
Talking of comebacks, you're always asked about Rio and whether that's a possibility, so we'll ask you. Rio, no. Is that a possibility?
No, I'm still pretty happy with the decision I made to call it quits on Olympic sailing. And you know, as we've seen, there's a lot of other exciting prospects in the world of sailing, and the America's Cup is really where I see my future, and I'm very excited about the prospects of the future America's Cup.
There's not too many ambitions to fulfil there, is there, as far as the Olympics is concerned? I think you ticked every box there. I just wonder what you do for fun these days. Do you ever go out sailing and think, oh, I'll just take a boat out, or you're always trying to beat the bloke next to you?
Yeah, I do. Funnily enough, I actually enjoy the sport that I partake in, which can sometimes be strange for a sportsman to say that. But no, I have a sailing boat that I go out cruising on, and you know, go out with mates and maybe have a beer sailing along, just enjoying being out there. And, but
are you always trying to beat the boat next to you,
no,
who's out just for a bit of fun?
Of course not. No, I'm not even allowed to steer. I have to just crew. Yeah, take my mum and dad out. They still love their sailing. And you know, many other sort of golf. I love the odd round of golf, although I'm absolutely terrible at it. But I get invited to the odd pro-am and go up and make a complete fool out of myself, but it's all good fun.
Fantastic. It's been great fun to have you in.
Yeah,
It's been an honour to have you here. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.